Hi, and welcome everyone to the first virtual edition of Capacity Europe. It's great to be able to connect with you all while many of us are still facing travel restrictions. You have joined the new threats in a new world. Are you still cyber secure? Panel session in global connectivity. Before we get started in just a moment, hi, and welcome everyone to the first virtual edition of Capacity Europe. It's great to be able to connect with you all while many of us are still facing travel restrictions. You've joined the new threats in the world. Are you still cyber secure? Panel session in global connectivity. Before we get started in just a moment, hi, and welcome everyone to the first virtual edition of Capacity Europe. It's great to be able to connect with you all while many of us are still facing travel restrictions. You've joined the new threats in the world. Are you still cyber secure? Panel session in global connectivity. Before we get started in just a moment, hi, and welcome everyone to the first virtual edition of as well. Before we get started in just a moment, I would like to thank all of this year's sponsors for their support of Capacity Europe 2020. Please feel free to drop by their stand to say hello. Please also use the Capacity Europe 2020 virtual platform to network with fellow industry peers and visit the virtual exhibition stands throughout the course of the event. Here is our lineup. Here is our lineup of fantastic speakers for the session. But before I hand over to the session's moderator, James Nesbitt, to kick us off, just want to mention a few quick notes. The panel will be taking questions towards the end of the session. Please submit your questions throughout the session using the swap card live chat function so it can be addressed then. The session will be recorded and be available on demand for 30 days in the conference room section of the platform. So with that in mind, I'll introduce you to James. The panel will be taking questions towards the end of the session. Please submit your questions throughout the session using the swap card live chat function.
Thank you. I'm getting a bit of latency here, David, so you may need to mute something there on your end. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I'm James Nesbitt. I'm the director of the Cyber Senate, and welcome to the Capacity Europe panel session today addressing cybersecurity and are you still secure? Good question. And I'm privileged to be here today to introduce some of our panelists. And we will go ahead and kick off by introducing Jason Hart. Jason's the Chief Technology Officer for Trustonic. He's a globally recognized expert and visionary in the world of cybersecurity. He's on the Forbes Tech Council, and he's a technology leader with over 20 years of experience in executing team leadership and designing effective cyber and information security solutions. So welcome, Jason. I know we've had a brief talk and you've done a lot more than that, but welcome to the panel.
Hey, James. Good to meet you.
We're also welcoming here today Eric Cole, who's the Chief Executive Officer for Secure Anchor Consulting. He has more than 30 years of network security experience, is a distinguished cybersecurity expert, keynote speaker who helps organizations curtail the risk of cyber threats. He's worked with clients from Fortune 500 companies to top international banks to the CIA. Welcome to the panel, Eric.
Pleasure to be here.
Our next panelist is Hayrik Bond-Gunning, the CEO of SRM. He joined SRM in 2007, formerly the managing director at Kroll, prior to which he consulted for DHL in Iraq in 2003 and 2004 following the Iraq War. He was the head of client engagement for Merger Market, and he has a BA in geography and archaeology. And we've had a brief discussion as well, Hayrik, yesterday. So welcome to the panel session.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to speaking to you further. And our next panelist will be Charles Vanderwalt, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. He's the head of security research for Orange Cyber Defense. He was the co-founder of SensePost, which is a penetration testing company that made its mark in the industry globally for 2 decades. SensePost, to my understanding, was acquired by Orange Cyber Defense, and now you're leading a specialist security research unit there that identifies, tracks, and analyzes developments in the security landscape. Is that right? Yeah, good stuff. Welcome to the panel, Charles. And Liza Past will also be joining us, and she is growing the cybersecurity portfolio and the security products for the research and development intensive ICT company, Cybernetica. Ms. Past has served as the Chief National Cyber Risk Officer for the Estonian Government Office and Chief Research Officer prior to this as at the cybersecurity branch of the Estonia Information System Authority, where she's carried out analysis regarding risk, threat, and impact assessment. So welcome, Lisa.
Glad to be here.
So let's get busy. We have 40 minutes and we have a lot to talk about. So the title of this session is Are We Still Cyber Secure? And immediately I thought, are we cyber secure? It's not if, but when. From the background that I come from, I work in critical national infrastructure. But if we deploy defense in depth strategies, that's often the best that we can do on many levels. So what I would like to do is really look and talk to you, gentlemen, and Ms. Past, on what are we seeing out there? Jason, can we start off with you? What are we seeing out there?
Okay, so James, the way I see it is really simple. We're seeing more and more breaches occur on a daily basis, and at the same time, we're seeing more and more spend in cybersecurity, and the two are doing that. And ultimately, as a nation, as a world, we need to kind of go back to basic principles. Everyone assumes that, the next attack is going to be very highly sophisticated APT. But actually what it is from an attacker's point of view, they are becoming very situational aware and looking, one, at the technology risk, but also then taking the people in the process and taking an aggregated approach to conduct relatively simple attacks, which obviously are having dramatic effects.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Rick, what's your opinion on this? What are we seeing out there?
I mean, following on from what Jason said, I absolutely agree with his words. I think if we just focus in on telcos specifically, there are two groups that are focusing on them, and it hasn't changed much. Criminals are looking at it from a monetary gain perspective, and I think that telcos, with the huge amounts of personal data that they hold and the complexity of the way in which they've often grown, makes them a nice target, and something like we've seen something like Suncrypt ransomware strain having a huge impact. The others that are targeting them, I'd say, are state sponsored, because it is critical national infrastructure, and there's a massive impact that they can have on national economies.
Okay, thank you. Eric, what's your opinion? What are we seeing out there?
To me, just real summarizing, there's three big things I'm seeing out there. The first one is with the global epidemic, is being able to have location agnostic is the new normal, where the endpoint is becoming even more important, because even in critical infrastructure, people are not going to be coming back to the office anytime soon, and the probability of them working remotely is going to increase. So a lot more focus on how do we secure, protect, and lock down that endpoint now that that traditional corporate architecture is gone. The second big thing is we need to focus a lot more on detecting within encrypted traffic. I'm seeing a lot of our customers putting in new security technology, new behavioral analytics. The problem is the attackers are using encrypted command and control channels and slipping under the radar. So any new technology we put in place must be able to handle and analyze encrypted traffic. And then the third one is what I call the rule of 90%. Is companies are patching, locking down, and hardening their systems, but they're only doing 90% of them. So 90% of their servers are patched, 90% of their systems are properly configured, and the adversaries are very good and very clever at finding that 10% and exploiting it.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Lisa, what's your view? What are we seeing?
There's three things, and a lot of it is business as usual with a new twist. First of all, the state actors, so the detrimental but less common attackers in cyberspace, continue to be opportunistic and reactive, meaning that they'll use cyberspace as part of their incredibly integrated operations to undermine free market economies and to undermine democratic governance, which means that critical infrastructure providers end up being, or essential service providers end up being, one of the ways in, not then target, to dismiss or to create doubt and confusion in a society. And 5G in particular in the telecoms sector is either a force multiplier for the attacker, or alternatively a great opportunity for citizens and businesses, depending on how it's deployed and how careful we are about security, specifically in a 5G context. Secondly, as Eric already said, the pandemic has made us location agnostic. And in this incredibly fast digital transition, sometimes skipping a decade in some contexts, it's not just that endpoint security has become important again, but identity has become important again. Not just identity of the machines, but also identity of the users as they moved out of the secure parameters. And thirdly, it's clear that in the comparative context, comparing North America and Europe, Europe is lacking in shared situational awareness, in what's real-time or close to real-time, and in what's sort of cross-border actionable information sharing. I hesitate to call it intelligence just because that brings in a whole world of classification, which really is not the point, but it's sharing information that helps us protect ourselves when it's still actionable. So those three things.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Information sharing is definitely a big topic, and I'd love to jump into that a bit more. Charles, having heard all of this, what's Orange Cyber Defense? What's your experience, and what are you seeing out there? Nation state actors, we need to control identities. IoT is a big issue. What's your view?
Those are hard points to follow. I think everything that everyone has said is relevant, and I would share those perspectives. And I'm not sure that I have that much to add there. What I would perhaps want to do is just illuminate maybe two other facets of this discussion. The one is, I think, as a consequence of all of these symptoms, if you like, that we've been describing, what we're observing and what we're worried about is a real degradation in trust that people have, not only in technology, but also in the systems and the results that we would want that technology to support. And Lisa, mentioned free market systems and democracy. I think those are very acute examples of that. But we live in a society now where people no longer trust what they see. They no longer trust what they hear. They can't trust election results. They don't trust businesses to protect their identities. I don't think we feel safe around national critical infrastructure. We're not sure when factories are going to explode. And so I think there's, as a result of all of these systems, there's fundamentally a degradation of trust that's having, I believe, a really harmful impact on our society and moving us away from the sort of utopian digital nirvana that we thought that technology was going to lead us into. So that's on the one end of, if you like, of that discussion. And on the other, I think what we're interested in, and I particularly have a passion for, is understanding what the systemic factors are that allow those symptoms to continue to perpetuate. I forget who it was, but we made the point about spend increasing and yet breaches. It was you, Jason. Spend increasing and yet breaches increasing. And I'm very interested in understanding fundamentally why that is. And I think it starts with a lack of leadership, both at a government level, but also in the way our community is organized. There are other systemic factors too, but those are two that I'm particularly interested in.
And I mean, that's a really interesting point you brought up there, because obviously people trusting stuff. Now, to date, the world has seen what I call confidentiality breaches, but with the explosion of new ways of consuming data, generating data, edge compute, etc., and kind of other new technology coming, an attacker is ultimately going to move from confidentiality to integrity. So how can they intercept and alter the data unbeknown to an organization or individual? Moreover, the bigger issue is with an integrity attack is that you can't actually go back and kind of undo what's been done. With a confidentiality breach, you take a reputational dip, you dig yourself out of it, you're back on board. But in today's world, if the integrity of the data is being altered, we won't actually know until 2 or 3 years later, because that data has been consumed to make other business decisions, by which point that business has made that decision. And then they realize 2 or 3 years later, is that OF moment, it's game over. And that's the biggest concern and the biggest risk facing the industry generally, is how can you actually trust the integrity and have true accountability and auditability of the data that is being generated, consumed, and that we are making the appropriate business decisions.
And the last two gentlemen really, for me, have hit the nail on the head in terms of the macro issues. As an InfoSec community, whether in critical infrastructure in government or even in research and academia or development, we've gotten pretty good in terms of defending confidentiality and availability. There's good commercially available tools across the world and for any size of a network system organization. And furthermore, citizens have an idea of what those two attacks look like. They moved into the digital world slowly, and it's easy to conceptualize what a DDoS attack looks like. How a physical space would be overflooded with people and inquiries. But integrity, we're not as well prepared for, because of the element of uncertainty that it introduces. And it's harder to conceptualize. And furthermore, the defenses for integrity are like saying to people who are scared of math, trust us, we have some complicated crypto tools that will make it easier for you, which is like saying, trust your middle school science teacher, when you've learned throughout life that, math is not for you and math is not to be trusted. And secondly, what I think happens then to trust in a very macro view is that in societies where trust is domain specific, which is most countries that have had better fortune than mine in terms of experience in democratic governance, it tends to be that trust is domain specific. Citizens trust companies when they know a person across a counter. Citizens trust governments and civil service when they have an analog world counterpart. And that's really tricky as we're getting into this loss of trust and attacks on integrity world, whilst having to work remotely. Now, that's not true in all societies, of course. Estonians and those in my corner of the world tend to trust a system regardless of the domain and think of technology as ideology agnostic, meaning that for us, having a democratically elected government is a miracle in itself, and we trust them regardless of the field or domain or channel they operate in. But that's definitely not true across all of Europe, let alone the rest of the world.
Okay, I'm going to move us on from the trust discussion. Very, very good points. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Lisa. Folks, what is the business impact? For an audience like Capacity Europe, a cyber attack? I mean, and what are we looking at in relation to a business impact? Hey, Rick, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so just going back a tiny bit, I think that if we're looking at, the audience and telcos in particular, they're extremely complex IT environments, and, the ecosystems have grown over time through a variety of ways. M&A, we discussed, James, the other day, is one of the key things that has happened, and that leads to some really complicated systems, a lot of there's a lot of infrastructure that's there, a lot of protocols that were set up in the past in different ways, and therefore there are opportunities. And I think when you look at it from an M&A perspective, and you look at businesses that are acquiring other businesses and taking on perhaps poorly managed infrastructure, the opportunity is there from a breach perspective. When you overlay what we've talked about a little bit, and that has been talked about by Eric, in terms of the way in which people are using platforms remotely, you've got the COVID factor, where money is being used for or resourced in different ways within organizations, and perhaps not focused on the security. You've actually then got, I think, a kind of perfect storm, which will lead to both reputational, so we're back on the trust conversation, and regulatory issues for the audience.
Okay. And Eric, what's your views?
Yeah, to me, when it comes to impact, it really comes back down to what is your critical data and what are those business processes that you need to run your organization. I feel like with a lot of times we get so caught up with technology and the latest and greatest solutions that we lose sight of what cybersecurity really is. And cybersecurity is all about understanding, managing, and mitigating the risk of your critical data being disclosed, altered, or destroyed. And I know we had a lot of talk on the integrity piece and the confidentiality piece, but there's also that availability piece with ransomware having a huge impact on organizations. So to me, when you look at impact, what organizations need to do is put together a single one page that essentially says, what is your critical data and the business processes that support it? What are those threats? Are the biggest threats to your business confidentiality, where somebody discloses your data, integrity, where they alter it, or confidentiality, where it's not available? And then what are your biggest vulnerabilities, and what do you need to do to fix that? So to me, it's all about visibility. And I think a lot of organizations need to do a better job of getting visibility into their critical data, the exposures, and what impact that has on their business.
Mm-hmm. Asset inventory would be nice as well. So thank you for touching upon that.
I totally agree with you there. But again, if you, that's in reach of maybe the top Fortune 1000, okay? But your average business out there, okay, they can barely keep up with the acceleration of cloud. I've yet to find, even, working with the top 100 globally, like all my life, when I go into an organization and say, okay, a board, what is it you're protecting in your business? It takes me an hour to get the answer. Once we get to that point, okay, they go, oh, it's the cloud, it's X, it's Y. It takes a very, very long time for them to actually realize and rationalize that actually, from a bad guy's perspective, all they want is data. They don't care what type of data. So we get into, right, now we're kind of right, we've got into the point of it's data. What type of data? Where is the location of the data, the business process, the business flow? Once you've mapped that out, is it a confidentiality risk and integrity, accountability, and auditability risk? Most organizations, or in fact, very few organizations, have the ability, the capability, or the knowledge to even get to that point. So moreover, my point is, from a telecoms perspective, the telecoms industry, all this can be solved with technology really easily. So my point is, at what point does the security industry start stepping up and saying, look, this is just the way we have to consume or do business nowadays. Security is just part of the business process. And why don't the industry start solving some of these problems inherently within the technology. I'll give you a great example. Antivirus content filtering. The telcos consume that within the core, within the edge. It dealt with it. So why can't we do that for some other simple security controls or processes around cybersecurity and just make it part of the norm within the infrastructure itself?
Right.
And if this pandemic has taught us anything, it really is that the hygiene, cybersecurity is part of how you live your everyday lives. And also, to go back to the original question, are we cyber secure? Combining what the gentlemen have already said with the fact that there's no 100% security. There's on a strategic, from the strategic down to the operational, business process level, you have to accept that part of this using digital solutions is dealing with unknown unknowns. You have to have a risk management system in place, and you have to have security as part of your fundamental design of both processes and systems, because security as an afterthought is at least tenfold more expensive.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Charles.
Sorry. Really important point there. Okay, so security is just the cost of doing business in today's world. Okay, no company is going to be 100% secure. What we should be telling organizations and helping organizations is to be able to show they've taken due care, because in the event something happens, as long as they can show they were doing some of the fundamental basics properly and show due care, that's what's important. Okay, it's the ability to show due care and they were doing the basics properly.
Yeah, I would interject there and say that I don't believe that it's necessarily can be solved by technology alone. This is people, process, and technology. If you have remote staff clicking on phishing emails all across the world, you're going to be subject to ransomware. And that's what we're seeing, because folks are not trained in cybersecurity. Your procurement divisions are not. Most staff and companies, there's this lack of culture and a lack of perception of cybersecurity. It's not made a priority across a lot of different critical infrastructures out there. I'm sure telcos are no different. But if we can view cybersecurity as part of the design and a business enabler, and we start looking at the monetization elements of it, the C-level starts paying attention, and hopefully I believe that we get a lot more attention when they start understanding the impacts on their business if they do not invest in cybersecurity from the get-go. You don't want to end up like Sony or any of these other articles we've all seen. But in critical infrastructure where we work, we've really seen a shift in C-level investment into cybersecurity, because reliability is going to be paramount as well. So Charles, I know you'd like to hear from you on this as well.
I'm dying to weigh in. I want to maybe take a slightly left field approach again. So your question was about impact.
Yes.
And I want to float the hypothesis that if we look at the cost of doing business that Jason referred to, that there is a tendency in all businesses to underinvest. We underinvest in what's necessary to earn and reliably justify the trust that our users put in us. And when we do that, I believe effectively what we're doing is we're accruing debt. In the same way as the sort of development community will tell you that when you underinvest in your code at the expense in favor of, developing features or running to market or whatever, they talk about technical debt. I think in the security space, we accrue security debt. And I think that security debt literally adds up on the balance sheet, just like financial debt would, meaning it has to be paid off. But I also think that it accrues interest over time. So, as somebody said, I think Lisa said this, it's 10 times more expensive to fix it afterwards. So as we sort of underinvest in security, this debt is accruing and it's building interest over time. And I believe it sits there on the balance sheet of a business, fundamentally impacting that business's valuation in ways that go far and beyond just what the short-term impact may be of a breach in terms of cost to recover, legal fees, class action lawsuits, etc. And not only that, I think that that debt, because of how interconnected we are in society, gets shared and has almost a domino effect on other businesses in a society, so or in a community. So when you're talking about impact, I think there's two things that we miss. The one is, I think we tend to look at the short-term immediate costs of security failure, rather than understanding this sort of accumulative debt that I think eventually one day will have to be paid off. And I believe there are several businesses and business models even that, because of this accumulated debt, this tendency to underinvest in security, are effectively technically bankrupt, because what they would have to invest to bring their security up to scratch, if you like, exceeds their capacity to generate revenue. So that's the one thing that I think I like to think about when we talk about impact. But the other is, when we do these risk assessments, a business, because of how capitalism works, a business thinks about impact in terms of its own bottom line. And I think what we don't do enough is think about impact in terms of the broader business community and society on the whole. So when a telco fails to protect the confidentiality of a call or a voicemail or a user's location, and that gets used in a sort of hack and dump scheme that affects presidential elections, what is the impact of that? That goes far and beyond the balance sheet or the revenue stream of the business, and has a much broader impact on society as a whole. So for me, I think that the impact again is a degradation in the trust that's required in our digital systems to support, to act as infrastructure for the kind of society that I think most people are wanting to build.
And again, that trust can be embedded at default at the point of creation of the handset, the whole ecosystem, and whoever the persona is of what they're consuming in that ecosystem. Again, the technology is there. Okay, it just needs to be built into that business process day one from default.
But the obvious question here becomes, and I'm asking it because I don't have a perfect or even close to perfect answer, is how do you go about quantifying it for the balance sheet? Charles, you spoke about that. Insurance has a bit of modeling available in terms of cost of impact of cyber events and incidents. But how do you quantify it so that you can get the investment ahead of the attack or the incident?
James, would you like me to respond now? I don't know if that's the direction you want to take this.
I think I'm just gonna wait on that one, if you don't mind, Lisa. When we'll try and come back to it. We've got 7 minutes left, and I really want to just draw in the expertise of this panel and help the telecoms industry here towards the end of this panel understand how we can defend against it. So, hey Rick, can we start with you? And if each one of you could just give us a little bit of a synopsis on how you think that we could defend against, the telcos could defend against cyber risk.
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, I think we've all touched upon it. Jason, in particular, is on the technology side, and Eric, I think, was nodding furiously when you were talking about people and process being absolutely essential to it. There's a little bit of an overlay around investment that Charles picked up on, and I think it's a really interesting point, and correlating the debt to effectively the risk appetite is one of the key questions that Jason and I would always ask the board, as well as once they've gone through that process, is then what is your appetite for the risk around the various scenarios that we've talked about. So I'd say those are the areas to really focus on.
Okay. I do have a question that's come in, so we're going to go ahead and take that question real quick here from an audience member. What does the panel think we can do as a united industry to mitigate cyber threats and security risks in this digital age, which is really what this what we're talking about here, particularly in the areas of anti-fraud enforcement, standardized measures, and automated information sharing. Any of you have a quick answer to that one?
I'm a big believer in, and I understand the regulatory and other limitations, but I'm a big believer in sectorial platforms for that, for exactly that sort of information sharing. Whether it's, you know, a sectorial security operations center, and telcos are such an obvious place to start because they have they're probably the most mature right next to the financial industry for that, or an information sharing and analysis center where, you know, frankly, Americans are a little ahead of Europeans.
Okay. So let's just, I'm going to pull this back again, and folks, how can the telco industry help defend themselves more appropriately? Eric, got any ideas there?
Yeah, to me, the big one, and if there are some CISOs listening, I don't mean to offend you, but in my opinion, we don't have good security strategies with a good security leader. In most organizations, the CISO position is an advanced technical position. The CISO is still very technical, very hands-on. And to me, that's what's missing. If you listen to all the things from Jason and Charles and others, what we're really getting at is there's not proper communication being done in the organization. So we need that CISO to have strategic focus where they can speak the business language, they can understand the technology, they have a clear security strategy, and they drive it. Because as Jason said, when you go and talk to the board of directors and the CEO, you shouldn't have to spend an hour figuring out the critical data. That should already be clearly defined. That should be part of the security strategy. So to me, we really need to redefine what a CISO is, give them the resources, build out a proper security strategy, and then this starts to fix a lot of the problems we've addressed on this panel.
Governance as well. Yeah. Okay. Charles, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I can weigh in. I think if I'm talking to an entire business community like the telcos, I would echo what Lisa's saying. Firstly, look at engaging sectorally, putting structures and forums in place to collaborate. But I would argue to go beyond just information sharing and operational collaboration to creating a shared system of vision and values for security and trust in that community, and ultimately as a sector to take over the leadership of the security, fighting the security problem from the vendor space and the regulatory space, and to take that leadership on themselves. In other words, be in a position where you're the one organizing the conferences, defining what the topics are, inviting the speakers, leading the regulatory discussions, etc. I think businesses and sectors like telecommunications are too passive and too responsive, and I would encourage them to create a community, create forums, and take the lead on addressing the security problem.
Thanks, Charles. Well, it looks like we're out of time, folks. We've got 1 minute left, so I would like to close this panel, and I would like to thank all of you, Jason, Eric, Lisa, Charles. Thank you for joining Capacity Europe. Thank you for discussing this with me. Capacity Europe, thank you for having me on board. There's a lot more we can talk about, and it's been a great conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, James.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you to all the panelists. What a really interesting panel discussions there. And sorry for any technical hitches there at the start with the sound. I would like to once again thank the sponsors for their support of Capacity Europe 2020. It's appreciative to have all of your support on board as well. This has been a session as part of our on-demand series where you can find great session content across the Digital Infra Leaders Europe, Global Connectivity, Future Applied, Future Work, and Messaging and SMS tracks. The next Global Connectivity session taking place is the State of the Industry report at 2 p.m. British Summer Time. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope